My name is Evelyn, I'm 64 years old, and on Mother's Day my own son called me a failure in front of his entire family. Before I tell you how I took back the mansion he lived in, the company he ran, and his entire life, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The scene was something out of a magazine. We were at a ridiculously expensive restaurant in Scottsdale, the kind of place with gleaming crystal glasses and the hushed chatter of the city's elite. I of course was the odd one out. In my simple faded dress, I was the poor widowed mother, a charity case my successful son, Ethan, paraded around once a year to show what a good, generous man he was. Ethan, my only child, sat at the head of the table, looking every bit the part of the self-made millionaire he pretended to be. His wife, Jessica, sat beside him, dripping in diamonds that probably cost more than my entire life savings. Her parents, Richard and Carol, were there, along with Ethan's business partner, Mark, and a few of their wealthy friends. They were all laughing, sipping champagne, celebrating a day meant to honor mothers. A day they were about to turn into my personal nightmare. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. Still managing to survive, I see, Ethan said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. It was a jab disguised as a joke, a reminder that I was living off the scraps of his success. I forced a smile. I'm doing just fine, dear. Jessica chimed in, her voice like honey laced with poison. She eyed the small jar of homemade jam I'd brought as a gift, placing it on the far edge of the table as if it were contaminated. Oh, Evelyn, how quaint. I'm not sure where we'll put this. Their friends at the table chuckled. It was a familiar routine. The subtle digs, the condescending tones, the constant reminders of my place in their perfect, polished world. For years I had swallowed my pride. I had played the part of the grateful, doddering old woman because I loved my son, and I thought deep down he loved me too. But today was different. Today the cruelty wasn't subtle. It was a performance. After the main course was cleared, Ethan stood up, tapping his glass for a toast. He had been drinking, and his words were slurred with arrogance. I'd like to make a toast, he announced, a smirk playing on his lips. To my mother. For trying her best, I guess. The table erupted in uncomfortable laughter. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained a calm, placid mask. He wasn't done. He looked directly at me, his eyes cold and dismissive. You know, she always wanted me to be a success. I guess one of us had to make it, right? He then raised his champagne flute. Happy Mother's Day, you failure. The word hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Failure. My blood didn't run cold. It turned to ice. That was it. That was the moment. Years of silent bites, of swallowing my pride, of playing the part. It all solidified into a single sharp point of purpose. They expected tears. They expected me to shrink, to become even smaller. They were wrong. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my old worn handbag. My movements were calm, measured. I pulled out a simple manila envelope. It wasn't thick, but it was heavy with the weight of years of secrets. I placed it on the table. The sound it made against the polished mahogany was quiet, but it silenced the table. Every eye was on me. The smug look on Ethan's face faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Ethan, I began, my voice level and calm, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I think it's time you explained a few things to your guests. He stared at me dumbfounded. What are you talking about, Mom? Have you been drinking? I ignored him, my gaze unwavering. My voice was no longer the soft, hesitant tone they were used to. It was steel. Explain to your lovely wife, Jessica, why her $10,000 monthly allowance will be cut off. Not next week. Not tomorrow. But in the next 5 minutes. Jessica let out a sharp, theatrical laugh, a sound like breaking glass that drew the attention of the nearby tables. Oh, Evelyn, darling. I think you've had a little too much of the Chardonnay. $10,000? We're very generous to you, of course, but let's not get delusional. It's unbecoming at your age. Ethan tried to play the role of the patient, long-suffering son, placing a hand over mine as if to calm a hysterical child. Mom, that's enough. You're making a scene. Let's just enjoy the dessert. Okay. He tried to gently pry the manila envelope from my fingers, but my grip was like iron. I pulled it back, my hand perfectly steady. I'm not done, I said, my voice cutting through the nervous chatter with newfound authority. And I'm not confused. I turned my gaze to Jessica's parents, who were looking deeply uncomfortable. I also think you should explain to your in-laws Richard and Carol why the beautiful Scottsdale mansion they're so comfortable in, the one valued at over $2 million, will no longer be their home. You'll have 30 days to vacate. Richard, a man who had never spoken more than 10 words to me, sputtered. Now see here. What is the meaning of this? I ignored him, turning my attention to the final person at the table who was still processing the situation. And while you're at it, Ethan, you can explain to your partner Mark why Hale Construction, the company he believes is his future, the one he pours 60 hours a week into, is about to be dissolved and reformed under new ownership before this tiramisu is even served. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so thick you could feel it pressing in on you, muffling the distant clink of silverware from other diners. The nervous smiles had vanished, replaced by masks of shock and confusion. Mark was staring at Ethan, his face pale, a question burning in his eyes. Richard and Carol looked like they'd just been slapped. Mom, you're not well, Ethan stammered, his face losing its healthy tanned color. He was visibly sweating now. You're confused. We've been worried about your memory. This is exactly what we were talking about. That was my cue. I opened the unsealed envelope and slid the first document onto the polished table. It was a thick piece of paper, heavy with legal weight and embossed with an official seal. Am I confused about this, Ethan? It was the original deed to their magnificent mansion. I tapped a specific line in the middle of the page with my index finger, my nail making a sharp clicking sound. This is the deed. Signed and registered 15 years ago, not to you but to a private trust. The Evelyn Hale Legacy Trust, to be exact. It's an irrevocable trust established by my late husband as part of his inheritance plan. I am the sole trustee. You and your family have been living in my house, rent-free, for over a decade. Ethan snatched the paper, his hands trembling so badly the document rattled. He scanned it, his eyes darting back and forth, desperately searching for a loophole, a mistake. This is a mistake. Some kind of legal error. I handled the purchase myself. It was after my first big promotion. You mean the promotion I arranged for you with the CEO of that firm? An old friend of your father's? I corrected him gently, my voice betraying no emotion. I then slid out the next set of documents, fanning them out like a winning poker hand. And what about these? The titles for all 3 of your luxury vehicles. The silver Mercedes you drive? Here's the wire transfer confirmation for $110,000 from my personal investment account. Jessica's red convertible? $125,000, same account. And the black Lexus your in-laws used to go to the country club? $95,000. All paid in full. By me. Jessica was the first to completely break. She let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob, a wounded animal noise. No, this is impossible, she shrieked, her perfectly manicured hands flying to her face, smearing her expensive makeup. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at me. Look at you. You live in that horrible little house in Phoenix. You wear clothes from Goodwill. Your car sounds like it's about to explode. Her words, once meant to wound me, were now her only defense, a desperate mantra against a reality she couldn't comprehend. The other guests were frozen, their forks halfway to their mouths, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. They had come for a Mother's Day lunch. They were getting the drama of a lifetime. I leaned forward, a small sad smile touching my lips for the first time. Ah yes, my little performance. You see, Jessica, for years I have lived exactly the life I wanted you to see. I let you believe I was poor, that I was dependent on your charity. It was an experiment, you could say. A long, painful experiment to see who you truly were. To see who my son truly was, without the influence of money. Ethan dropped the deed back on the table as if it had burned his hand. His face was a ghostly white. Why, Mom? Why would you do this to us? To you? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. You have it backward, Ethan. The question is, after everything I gave you, why would you do what you did to me? He had no answer. He just stared at me, a dawning horror in his eyes, as he finally began to understand that the game was over. And he had lost. To understand why a mother would have to orchestrate such a devastating public reveal, I have to take you back 6 months. Back to the day I looked at my life, at my family, and made the conscious decision to become invisible. My husband, Robert, was a brilliant man. Not flashy but methodical and wise. He wasn't a high-flying CEO. He was a quiet, unassuming civil engineer who on the side had a genius for real estate. Over 40 years, he had slowly and quietly acquired a portfolio of commercial properties and investments that had grown into a substantial fortune. When he passed away from a sudden heart attack, he left me with more than just a broken heart. He left me with a significant inheritance, a testament to a lifetime of smart, careful planning alongside the man I loved. Ethan, however, only knew a fraction of this. He knew we were comfortable. He knew his college fund was paid for and that we had no debts. But he saw his father as just a steady, boring engineer. He never understood the depth of Robert's financial acumen. So, when I was left with the estate, Ethan assumed it was a modest sum, the house, the life insurance, maybe a few $100,000 in savings. Enough to live on, but not enough to be considered rich. I never corrected this assumption. It felt private, something that belonged to me and the memory of my husband. After Robert was gone, I watched Ethan change. He'd always been ambitious, but now a desperate, hungry quality entered his eyes. He married Jessica, a woman whose own ambition was laser-focused on acquiring status and luxury. Their appetite for a lavish lifestyle grew with each passing day. He started his construction business, and when he came to me asking for a significant loan to get it off the ground, I saw it as a way to help my son honor his father's legacy in the world of building. I gave it to him, no questions asked. Then he needed more for equipment, then more for payroll. I saw the business was struggling, but I couldn't bear to see my son fail. So I did more than just loan him money. I began to secretly prop him up. I used my late husband's connections to introduce him to influential people. I funneled money into his company through anonymous third-party investments, ensuring he won contracts he never would have landed on his own. When they wanted to move to a bigger house, I found the mansion in Scottsdale. I bought it outright through my trust and worked with a lawyer to create a backstory of a motivated seller and a favorable loan that Ethan believed he had cleverly negotiated himself. I did all this because I wanted my son to feel successful. I wanted him to be happy and secure. I see now with painful clarity how my protection had become his poison, shielding him from reality and allowing his arrogance to grow unchecked. My real home, the penthouse, remained my secret sanctuary. But I rarely stayed there. Instead, I moved into the small two-bedroom bungalow in Phoenix that Robert and I had first bought as a rental property. I filled it with second-hand furniture. I let the paint peel a little. I drove a 15-year-old Ford that rattled every time I hit a bump. I did this because a terrifying question had started to form in my mind. If I wasn't their benefactor, who was I to them? I needed to see my son and his wife for who they really were, stripped bare of any financial expectation from me. Every Sunday, I would make the drive to my own mansion. It was a pilgrimage of self-inflicted pain. I would be greeted at the door not as the owner, but as a poor relation, a duty to be endured for a few hours. I was always treated like a second-class citizen. They would seat me at the far end of the long dining table, a physical representation of my place in their lives. My stories about their father, my attempts to connect, were met with polite, vacant smiles. I was a relic from a past they wanted to forget. Jessica was the master of the subtle insult. "Evelyn, are you managing okay with the house expenses?" she'd ask with fake concern, loud enough for her parents to hear. "I hope that $500 Ethan sends you each month is enough. We know how hard it can be to budget at your age." $500. A sum they framed as a monumental act of generosity. And I played along. I would nod gratefully, thank them profusely, and tell them I didn't know what I'd do without them. Each word felt like swallowing glass. The pain was sharp, but the truth it revealed was sharper still. I had decided to become the invisible woman. But what I didn't know was that while I was playing poor, they were playing a much more dangerous game. A game that would end with them trying to have me declared legally insane. The humiliation wasn't a single catastrophic event. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, each one carving away a piece of my spirit, each one meticulously catalogued in my memory. As the months wore on, Ethan and Jessica grew bolder, their contempt for me becoming more and more overt, as if they were testing the limits of my endurance. The first truly cruel incident, the one that showed me the blackness in Jessica's heart, happened on a Sunday in February. I'd spent all of Saturday baking my late husband's favorite apple pie. It was his mother's recipe, a piece of our family history passed down through generations. It was more than a dessert, it was a memory. I remember baking it with Ethan when he was a little boy, his small hands covered in flour, the sweet smell of cinnamon filling our small kitchen. I brought it to the mansion, carefully cradled in my arms, hoping for a flicker of nostalgia, a moment of connection. Jessica opened the door. She was dressed in a pink velour tracksuit that probably cost more than my monthly allowance. Her perfectly microbladed eyebrows furrowed as her eyes fell on the pie box in my hands. "Oh God, Evelyn," she sighed, the sound exaggerated and weary, as if my presence alone was an exhausting chore. "Another one of your homemade things. I've told you 1,000 times we have a personal chef. We don't eat this carb-loaded, sugary stuff." My face felt hot. "It was Robert's favorite recipe," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "I thought Ethan might." "Ethan is on a keto diet." She cut me off, her tone sharp. She took the box from my hands, her long blood-red acrylic nails clicking against the cardboard. "Honestly, it's just a waste. We have a flourless chocolate torte for dessert." And then, as I stood there in the grand marble foyer, frozen in disbelief, she walked into the kitchen. She didn't even bother to put it on the counter. She simply stepped on the pedal of the tall stainless steel trash can, and with a flick of her wrist dropped the entire pie inside. The lid closed with a soft metallic whoosh. She didn't look at me. She just turned to the sink and began washing her hands as if she'd touched something filthy. A hot flash of pure rage crawled up my neck, so intense it made me dizzy. But I pushed it down. "Remember this," a cold voice in my head said. "File it away." The emotional cuts were the deepest. For what would have been my 45th wedding anniversary, I decided to do something truly special. I took the beautiful single-strand pearl necklace Robert had given me on our 25th anniversary, a timeless, elegant piece, and I brought it to Jessica. It was the last piece of fine jewelry I had from him that I hadn't put in the bank vault. "I want you to have this," I told her, my voice thick with emotion as I opened the velvet box. "It was so special to your father-in-law. It represents a lifetime of love. I want it to stay in the family." Jessica put on a grand show of gratitude, gushing about how beautiful it was and how honored she was. She put it on and wore it for the rest of the evening. That was the last time I ever saw it on her. A few weeks later I asked her about it. "Oh, the necklace," she said, her face a perfect mask of tragedy. "It's such a disaster. I was wearing it to a charity gala, and the clasp must have broken. I lost it. I searched everywhere. I feel absolutely terrible, Evelyn." She seemed so convincing, so genuinely upset. I actually felt a pang of guilt for her loss. Then, about a month after that, they hosted a large cocktail party at the mansion. I was there, of course, a silent fixture in a corner chair. I watched as one of Jessica's friends, a woman named Tiffany, laughed loudly, her head thrown back. And there, gleaming against her tan skin, was my pearl necklace. Robert's necklace. My heart stopped. I felt the air leave my lungs. I must have looked pale because Tiffany noticed me staring and walked over, a champagne flute in her hand. "Isn't it lovely?" she said, touching the pearls with a proprietary air. "Jessica gave me a fabulous deal on it. She said it was some old family heirloom, far too old-fashioned for her tastes. Can you imagine? It's a classic. I just had to have it." It felt like a punch to the gut. She hadn't just lost it. She had sold it. She had sold a piece of my husband's memory, a symbol of our love, for a bit of pocket money because it was old-fashioned. She had looked me in the eye and lied without a flicker of remorse. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with arrogance or selfishness. I was dealing with a profound and chilling lack of a soul. The cruelty became a kind of sport for them, a weekly ritual to reinforce my status as the family outcast. Each Sunday was a new opportunity to chip away at my dignity. The final straw, the act that severed any lingering foolish hope I had for them, was the incident with the folding chair. They had decided to redecorate the dining room, a project masterminded by Jessica and her mother. This apparently involved buying a new ridiculously expensive dining set from Italy. When I arrived for Sunday dinner, I immediately noticed my usual spot at the table was gone. In its place, tucked away in a corner near the swinging door to the kitchen, was a cheap metal folding chair, the kind you'd find in a church basement. It was a stark, ugly contrast to the plush, upholstered chairs everyone else was sitting on. "Sorry, Mom," Ethan said, not even looking up from his phone as I stood there staring at the chair. "The new set is for 8, and it just ruined the symmetry of the design to have an odd one out. You don't mind, do you?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I didn't belong. I was the odd one out, the disruption to their perfect aesthetic, an unwanted variable in their carefully curated life. So I sat. I sat on my cold, metal throne of shame, physically separated from the family. From that vantage point, I was a ghost at the feast. I could hear their laughter, their conversations about extravagant vacations to the Bahamas and ski trips to Aspen. I could see the glint of their expensive watches as they reached for more wine. But I was not part of it. The small distance created by that chair was a chasm, a clear and deliberate line drawn between their world and mine. They talked about money constantly, always in figures so large they were meant to be incomprehensible to someone like me. It was a performance for my benefit. "The property taxes alone on this place are $30,000 a year," Ethan would announce to the table, sighing dramatically as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. He'd catch my eye from across the room. "That's before we even talk about the pool maintenance, the landscapers, the new security system. It's a huge burden. That's why we can only spare $500 for you, Mom. We're stretched so thin. I hope you understand." I would nod from my corner, my food tasting like ash in my mouth. A burden. That's what I was to them. Not a mother, not family, but a financial line item they resented having to pay. The irony was so thick it nearly choked me. My money was paying those property taxes. My money was paying for that pool. My money was paying for the very food on their plates. Yet I was made to feel grateful for the crumbs they threw my way. The worst part was watching them with Jessica's parents, Richard and Carol. They treated them like royalty. They were seated on either side of Ethan, included in every conversation, their opinions sought after. They lived in the mansion's guest wing, enjoying all the luxuries my money provided, and they looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. They were part of the inner circle, and I was the beggar at the gate. They had successfully replaced me in my own family, in my own home. One Sunday, as I sat in my corner, pretending to be engrossed in a napkin, I overheard Jessica talking to her mother. Her voice was a low, conspiratorial whisper, but it carried easily across the room in a lull in the conversation. "I just don't know how much longer we can do this," she whispered, gesturing vaguely in my direction with her wine glass. "These Sunday visits are becoming such a drag." She just sits there looking miserable. "It's draining." Carol patted her hand, a look of grim sympathy on her face. "I know, dear. But you have to be patient. You heard what Ethan said. He's working on a more permanent solution." A permanent solution. The word sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the draft from the kitchen door. I didn't know what it meant at the time, but a sense of dread began to settle deep in my bones. I was no longer just an inconvenience to them. I was a problem that needed to be solved, and I was about to find out just how permanent and how monstrous their solution was going to be. The permanent solution was revealed a few weeks later, on a Sunday that felt heavier and more ominous than the rest. They didn't wait until dinner. They sat me down in the formal living room as soon as I arrived, on the stiff, uncomfortable sofa no one ever used. It felt like an intervention, a carefully staged corporate meeting where I was the employee about to be downsized. Ethan and Jessica sat opposite me in matching wingback chairs, their faces arranged in masks of solemn concern. It was a chillingly unified performance. "Mom," Ethan began, his voice oozing with a fake sincerity that made my skin crawl. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, trying to look earnest. "Jessica and I have been very worried about you lately." "Deeply worried." Jessica nodded, dabbing at a non-existent tear in the corner of her eye with a silk handkerchief. "We've noticed you've been more forgetful lately," she added, her voice soft and full of faux sympathy. "Just little things. Like last week, you couldn't remember our landscaper's name. And living alone in that big house. It's just not safe for you anymore. The neighborhood is changing. We can't bear the thought of something happening to you and no one being there to help." My mind raced, fact-checking their lies. I had never known their landscaper's name. The little things they were referencing were fabricated, designed to build a narrative of my decline. This was a script and they were terrible actors, but they were committed to their roles. We've been doing some research, Ethan continued, taking a deep breath as if what he was about to say was a great personal sacrifice. We've spent weeks looking for the perfect place, because we love you so much and we want what's best for you in your golden years. Jessica leaned forward and placed a glossy, trifold brochure on the coffee table in front of me. The cover showed a photoshopped image of smiling, silver-haired seniors playing shuffleboard on a perfectly manicured lawn. The name on the front, in elegant gold script, read Sunset Gardens Senior Community. It's a luxury retirement community, Jessica chirped, her voice suddenly bright and cheerful, a jarring shift in tone. It's more like a 5-star resort. They have a gourmet chef, daily activities like yoga and painting, 24-hour medical staff on site, a heated swimming pool, even a beauty salon. Imagine it, Evelyn. No more cooking, no more cleaning, no more worrying about home repairs or paying bills. Just a life of comfort and dignity, surrounded by people your own age. They painted a beautiful picture. A paradise where I would be safe, cared for and entertained. A golden cage designed to remove me from their lives permanently. And the best part, Mom, Ethan said, delivering what he thought was the final irresistible blow. We're going to pay for all of it. The monthly fee is substantial, over $3,000, but you're our mother. We see it as our duty and our privilege to provide this for you. We'll handle everything. It was almost masterful in its cruelty. They were offering me a life of luxury they claimed I couldn't afford, paid for by their supposed generosity, all while making me feel like an incompetent child who couldn't be trusted to live on her own. We've even spoken to a real estate agent about your house, Jessica added casually, as if it were an afterthought. A lovely man named Gary. He thinks we can get it sold quickly, especially in this market. The money from the sale can go into a special fund to help cover your expenses at Sunset Gardens. It will be like your own house is paying for your wonderful new life. They had it all figured out. My expulsion, gift wrapped and tied with a bow of false love. They were so proud of themselves, so sure they had cornered me. I felt a wave of nausea. I needed to think to get out of there. I told them I needed time to process it, that it was a big decision. They exchanged a look, a flicker of annoyance quickly hidden. Of course, Ethan said smoothly. Take all the time you need. We've scheduled a tour for you on Wednesday. We're sure you'll love it once you see it. They described it as a paradise, a gift of love. If only I knew the real reason, the nightmare behind their eagerness to send me away. Keep watching, because what I discovered next will make your blood run cold. I went on that tour on Wednesday. It was fine. The grounds were neat, the staff was polite and well rehearsed, but there was a sterile, lifeless feeling to the place. The smiles of the residents seemed forced, their eyes vacant. It felt less like a resort and more like a beautifully decorated waiting room for the end of life. I left feeling deeply unsettled, a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The following Sunday, I went to the mansion as usual, my mind still reeling. I needed more information. I needed to understand what was really happening. And then fate, or perhaps Jessica's own arrogant carelessness, handed me the answer on a silver platter. We were in the living room after dinner, the awkward silence hanging heavy in the air. Jessica, complaining of a migraine from the stress of it all, lounged dramatically on the sofa. Evelyn, could you be a dear and get my purse from the kitchen? I need my pills, she said, not even looking up from her magazine. She treated me like a servant, and in that moment, her dismissiveness was my opportunity. I went to the kitchen, found her ridiculously expensive designer handbag sitting on the granite countertop, and picked it up. Just as I did, her phone, which was in an outer pocket, lit up and buzzed. A notification appeared on the screen. It was from a group chat. The name of the group made my heart stop cold. Operation Sunset Villa. My hand started to tremble. This was it. This was the permanent solution. Normally, I would never invade someone's privacy. I was raised better than that. But this wasn't normal. This was a fight for my life, for my autonomy, for my very sanity. My instincts screamed at me to look. With shaking fingers, I slid the phone out of the purse. The message preview on the lock screen was from Jessica's sister, Pamela. It read, "So did the old hag buy it? Is she going to the home? Mom says she's already picked out new curtains for the guest wing. My breath caught in my throat. Old hag. That's what they called me behind my back. My own family. I quickly glanced towards the living room. They were still talking, oblivious. My fingers flew across the screen, my mind a blur. I guessed her passcode. It was Ethan's birthday 0-8-1-4. Disgustingly predictable. The phone unlocked. I opened the group chat. It included Jessica, her sister Pamela, her mother Carol, and my son Ethan. The conversation history went back for weeks. What I read made the blood drain from my face. It was worse than anything I could have imagined. It wasn't just an expulsion, it was a coup. Jessica. Tour went well. She seemed hesitant, but we're pushing the safety angle hard. She'll cave. She's weak. Carol, her mother, good. The sooner she's in, the sooner you can get the lawyer to file the papers. Did you get the doctor's report? Ethan. Dr. Klein is on board. He's already written a preliminary assessment documenting her cognitive decline and episodes of confusion, based on what we've told him. He'll make it official after he observes her at the Mother's Day lunch. Cognitive decline? Episodes of confusion? They were building a fraudulent medical case against me. But why? The next series of messages revealed the sickening endgame. Jessica. Once she's admitted, the home's policy is to manage all resident medications. We'll make sure Dr. Klein prescribes a heavy sedative. Keep her calm and docile. Pamela. LOL, turn the old hag into a zombie. Ethan. It's not a joke, Pam. It's necessary. After she's been there for 6 months and is properly medicated, our lawyer, Mr. Davies, says we'll have a strong case to file for legal custody. We can argue she's mentally unfit to manage her own affairs and finances. Carol. And then you'll have full control of her assets. Even if it's just the house and a little savings from the inheritance, every penny counts. We can finally renovate the guest wing and get that new pool heater. I had to grip the counter to keep from collapsing. They weren't just trying to get rid of me. They were planning to have me drugged into oblivion, declared mentally incompetent, and then legally rob me of everything I had left. They wanted to take my home, my savings, my very autonomy. They wanted to erase me. The cold fury that washed over me was so pure, so absolute, it burned away all the grief and sadness. In that moment, the timid, accommodating mother they knew died. And in her place, a woman they had no idea existed was born. I stood up, took a series of quick, clear photos of the entire chat history with my own phone, and then meticulously deleted the photos from her phone's recently deleted folder. I put her phone back in her purse, took a deep breath and walked back into the living room, a serene smile on my face, carrying the bag that held the evidence of their monstrous betrayal. The drive home from Scottsdale to Phoenix that night was different. The rattle of my old Ford didn't bother me. The darkness didn't feel lonely. It felt like a cloak, a shroud for the woman I used to be. The shock had worn off on that drive, replaced by a glacial calm that settled deep in my bones. The hurt was still there, a deep cold stone in my gut, but it was now fuel. I was no longer a victim being swept along by the current of their cruelty. I was a general surveying the battlefield, and I was about to plan a war. The moment I walked into my little house, I didn't sit down and cry. The time for tears was over. I went straight to the old rotary phone on my kitchen wall. I kept it for the aesthetic of my role, and dialed a number I knew by heart. My first and only call was to David Chan, the lawyer who had worked with my husband Robert for 30 years. He wasn't just a lawyer who handled our estate planning. He was a dear friend who had been at our wedding and had held my hand at Robert's funeral. He was one of the few people on earth who knew the true state of my finances. David, it's Evelyn Hale, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. Evelyn, it's good to hear from you. How are you holding up? His voice was warm and kind, a stark contrast to the venom I had just been exposed to. I'm about to be the victim of a conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and theft, I said flatly, dispensing with any pleasantries. And it's being orchestrated by my son and his wife. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could picture him in his leather office chair, his brow furrowed. I quickly laid out everything. The 6 months of humiliation, the Sunset Gardens plot, and the horrifying contents of the group chat I had discovered. As we spoke, I forwarded him the pictures of the messages from my phone, I heard him let out a low whistle as he presumably opened them. "My God, Evelyn," he said, his voice now grim and serious. "This is monstrous. This goes beyond family drama. They're not just trying to put you in a home, they're trying to set you up for a conservatorship. They want legal custody of you so they can liquidate your assets. With a fraudulent doctor's report and family testimony, they could actually succeed if you didn't have the resources to fight it." "I know," I said. "And we are going to let them think they're succeeding. Right up until the very last moment. I don't want to just stop them, David. I want to build a case so ironclad, so utterly devastating, that they will have no escape. I want them to walk into their own trap." David, ever the strategist, understood immediately. You don't just want to defend yourself. You want to go on the offensive. You want to burn it all down. "I want to dismantle the entire world they've built on my money and my silence," I replied, the words tasting like justice on my tongue. "I want them to feel, just for a moment, the helplessness they planned for me to feel for the rest of my life." For the next week, David and I worked tirelessly. We met in his office, a place of quiet power filled with law books and the smell of old paper. We updated my will and all my legal directives, adding specific clauses that would make any attempt to declare me incompetent a legal nightmare for them. We created a comprehensive portfolio of my assets, complete with dates of purchase and proof of funds, all tracing back to my accounts. The deeds, the car titles, the stock certificates, the secret ownership of Ethan's company. We organized it all into a weaponized binder, each page a bullet aimed at the heart of their deception. David's final piece of advice was crucial. "We need more than just the texts, Evelyn. We need to document their current financial state and their actions in real time. We need to prove their motive beyond a shadow of a doubt." "How do we do that?" I asked. "You hire the best private investigator in Arizona," he said without hesitation. "A man named Frank Miller. He's an ex-cop, sharp as a tack and specializes in family fraud. He'll find things they don't even know they've hidden." The next morning, I met Frank at a quiet diner downtown. He was a man in his 50s with observant, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He listened to my story without interruption, his expression unreadable as I laid out the whole sordid affair. When I was finished, he took a slow sip of his coffee. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble. "In my 20 years on the force and 10 years doing this, I've seen a lot of garbage. But children planning to drug their own mother to steal her inheritance, that's a special kind of evil." He looked me straight in the eye. "I'll take the case. And I promise you by the time I'm done, you'll know every secret they have, every dollar they owe, and every lie they've ever told." The war had officially begun. Frank Miller worked with a terrifying efficiency that was both awe-inspiring and deeply unsettling. It was like unleashing a quiet, methodical hurricane on Ethan and Jessica's picture-perfect lives. He was a ghost, digging into their finances, their social circles, and their secrets, all while they remained completely oblivious, busy planning my demise. Within 2 weeks, he had compiled a dossier that was even more damning than I had imagined. He presented his findings to me and David in David's large, wood-paneled office. The atmosphere was grim. Frank spread a series of financial statements and credit reports across the large conference table, a paper trail of their desperation. "Here's the reality," Frank began, pointing to a long column of red numbers on a credit card statement. "Your son, Ethan, is drowning in debt. We're talking over $200,000 in personal credit card debt and unsecured loans. He's been using one card to pay off another. His salary from the company, the one you pay him, isn't nearly enough to support the lifestyle he's projecting. He's been living far beyond his means for years." He slid another folder across the table, this one filled with receipts from designer boutiques and invoices from cosmetic surgery clinics. "And your daughter-in-law, Jessica, is no better. $50,000 owed to high-end department stores and med spas. She's been paying the minimums, just enough to keep the wolves from the door. They are financially hemorrhaging." The biggest bombshell was about the company, Hale Construction. "It's a facade, Mrs. Hale," Frank explained, his voice flat. "It looks successful from the outside, but it's a house of cards. Without your continuous capital injections and the high-profile contracts you secretly secured through your old connections, the company would have folded 2 years ago. Ethan's partner, Mark, has no capital invested. He's essentially a glorified employee who thinks he's a partner. Ethan has been lying to everyone, including himself. They weren't just ungrateful, they were desperate. The Sunset Gardens plot wasn't just about getting rid of me. It was a frantic cash grab to save themselves from the consequences of their own financial irresponsibility. Their motive was now crystal clear and provably desperate. But we needed more. We needed to catch them in the act of conspiring. That's when we came up with the riskiest and what would become the most crucial part of the plan. "They see you as harmless, Evelyn," David said, his fingertips steepled. "Completely oblivious. A frail old woman. We can use that." The following Sunday I went to the mansion for dinner, my heart pounding in my chest with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. In my oversized handbag, nestled between my wallet and my reading glasses, were 3 state-of-the-art listening devices, no bigger than a thumbnail. During a moment when they were all in the dining room arguing about which wine to open, I feigned a dizzy spell. "Oh my," I said, pressing a hand to my forehead and leaning against the doorframe. "I just feel a little faint. The drive was long. Would you mind if I used the guest room to lie down for a moment?" Jessica, visibly annoyed but needing to maintain the facade of the caring daughter-in-law, agreed with a tight smile. "Of course, Evelyn. Rest as long as you need." He gave me 15 minutes alone. I moved with a speed and purpose they would never have thought possible. One device went under the heavy oak coffee table in the living room. Another went under the lip of the granite desk in Ethan's home office. The last one, and the most important, I placed under the kitchen island where they always gathered to talk after I had gone home. For the next 2 weeks, those tiny devices became my eyes and ears. I listened to hours of recordings each night, sitting in my quiet little house, a pair of headphones on, as the true nature of my family was laid bare. What I heard confirmed everything and then some. I heard Ethan on the phone with the crooked lawyer, Mr. Davies, discussing how to expedite the process of having me declared incompetent once I was in the home. "We'll need the judge to sign off on it quickly," I heard Ethan say. "We have falsified medical reports from Dr. Klein and several witnesses, Jessica's parents, willing to testify that she's been acting erratically." The lawyer's reply was chillingly casual. "Don't worry, Mr. Hale. With the documentation you've provided, I can guarantee you'll have full legal control of your mother's assets in less than 4 months. My fee will be $10,000, but considering what you stand to gain from the sale of her properties, it's a very profitable investment." But the recording that sealed their fate, the one that I knew would be my finishing move, was a phone call between Jessica and her mother, Carol, a few nights before Mother's Day. "The stupid old woman is actually excited about the Mother's Day lunch," Jessica said, and I could hear the sneer in her voice. "She thinks we're finally appreciating her. She has no idea that it's her farewell party. She has no idea that Sunset Gardens is basically a prison for the elderly where they're going to medicate her until she's a drooling zombie. In 6 months she won't even remember her own name." I saved the recording, my hands cold as ice. The board was set. The pieces were in place. Mother's Day was just 5 days away. It was time for the checkmate. Mother's Day dawned bright and sunny, a beautiful Arizona morning that felt like a mockery of the storm I was about to unleash. I chose my armor with meticulous care. Not my usual faded Goodwill attire, but an elegant deep red sheath dress I had bought for the occasion. It was simple but impeccably tailored, the kind of quiet quality that speaks for itself. For the first time in years, I wore the diamond earrings Robert had given me on our 30th anniversary. They were my battle standards. When I arrived at the restaurant, the scene was exactly as I had pictured. The whole cast of characters was assembled, basking in the glow of their perceived success. Ethan and Jessica greeted me with hugs that were as cold as they were theatrical, a performance for the benefit of their friends. Her parents, Richard and Carol, smiled at me with that familiar cloying pity. Ethan's partner, Mark, gave me a condescending pat on the arm. "Mom, you look wonderful," Ethan exclaimed, his performance in full swing. "So lovely to see you making an effort. See, Jessica? I told you she still cleans up nice." The casual insult barely registered. I was beyond being wounded by their petty words. I smiled a serene, empty smile. Then Ethan led me over to the table and gestured to an older gentleman I didn't recognize. He was distinguished looking, with a mane of silver hair and a kind, grandfatherly face that I knew was a complete and utter lie. "Mom, I'd like you to meet Dr. Klein," Ethan said, his voice smooth as silk. "He's a friend of the family, a specialist in geriatric medicine. I invited him to join us today. I thought you two would have a lot to talk about." My blood ran cold, but I smiled graciously and shook the doctor's hand. His grip was firm, his eyes assessing. So this was it. The ambush. They weren't even waiting until I was in the home. They were starting the process of documenting my incompetence right here, right now in public. Their arrogance was breathtaking. The lunch was a surreal performance. The food was exquisite, the wine flowed, and the conversation was a carefully constructed minefield. Dr. Klein, the wolf in sheep's clothing, would periodically turn to me and ask leading questions with a gentle, patronizing tone that made my teeth ache. "Evelyn, what a lovely story," he'd say after I shared a brief, harmless memory of Ethan's childhood. "And that was in 1985, did you say? Or was it 86? It's so easy to get those years mixed up as we get older, isn't it?" "It was 1985, I replied clearly, looking him directly in the eye, giving him no room for misinterpretation. "The year the Chicago Bears won the Super Bowl. I remember because Robert had painted his face blue and orange and scared the cat." He would smile, a tight, professional smile, and make a small note on a pad he kept in his pocket. He asked me if I was taking any medications. When I said no, he looked surprised. "Really? None at all? Not even for blood pressure?" He asked if I ever felt dizzy or confused, if I sometimes had trouble finding the right words, if I found managing my own finances to be a challenge. Each question was a carefully laid trap, designed to paint me as a frail, confused old woman in front of a table full of witnesses who could later be called upon to testify to my decline. Ethan and Jessica would watch these exchanges, exchanging triumphant, self-satisfied glances over the rim of their wine glasses. They thought they were so clever. They thought they had me perfectly cornered, a helpless creature caught in the headlights. They had no idea they were the ones in the trap. Finally, as dessert was being served, Ethan stood up, tapping his glass with a fork. This was the moment from 6 months ago, the moment that had started it all, but now I was seeing it with clear, cold eyes, understanding every nuance of the betrayal. "I'd like to make a toast," he began, his voice filled with fake emotion. I could see him glancing at Dr. Klein, making sure his performance was being noted. "As many of you know, we've been very worried about my mother's well-being lately. It's been a source of great stress for our family." He paused for dramatic effect. "That's why, as a family, we've made the difficult but necessary decision to help her transition into a wonderful new phase of her life at Sunset Gardens, where she can get the specialized care she deserves." Murmurs of approval went around the table. "How wonderful!" one of Jessica's friends cooed. "What dedicated children!" Jessica stood up, placing a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy, proprietary, the grip of a prison guard. "And to make this transition easier," she said, her eyes glistening with crocodile tears, "we've already taken the difficult step of listing her little house for sale. The money will ensure she is never a financial burden to anyone." Ethan then raised his glass high, the final nail in his own coffin. "So a toast. To my mother. For trying her best, I guess. Happy Mother's Day, you failure." The insult landed just as it had before. But this time it wasn't a wound. It was a starting pistol. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting their smug, self-congratulatory smiles settle on their faces. Then, with the calm precision of a bomb disposal expert, I reached into my handbag and pulled out the manila envelope. The show was about to begin. I placed the envelope on the table with a soft thud that echoed in the sudden, complete silence. Every eye at the table, and several from the tables nearby, swiveled from Ethan's triumphant face to the plain, unassuming object in front of me. "Before we continue with this emotional celebration," I said, my voice calm and clear, resonating with an authority no one in that room had ever heard from me before, "I believe there are a few financial matters and legal discrepancies we need to address." The smiles on Ethan and Jessica's faces tightened into confused grimaces. Dr. Klein watched me with a new, sharp, professional curiosity, his pen poised over his notepad as if I were a case study that had suddenly come to life. "Ethan," I said, my eyes locking onto his, You've built a wonderful life for yourself. A beautiful wife, a successful company, a stunning home. But a life built on lies has a very weak foundation. And today we're going to see just how weak that foundation is. I slid out the first document, unfolding it with a crisp snap. The deed to the mansion. Let's start with your home. Or rather, my home. As this deed, registered in the Evelyn Hale Legacy Trust for the past 15 years, clearly states, I am the sole trustee. Your lease, so to speak, has just been terminated. Then came the car titles. I laid them out one by one, a fan of betrayal. Your silver Mercedes. Her red Mercedes. Their black Lexus. All purchased by me with funds from my private accounts. The repossession orders have already been filed. They will be collected on Monday morning. I'd advise you to clear out your personal belongings. The color was draining from Ethan's face. He looked like he was going to be sick. Jessica was hyperventilating. Her carefully constructed mask of poise cracking and crumbling before our very eyes. You're lying, she hissed, her voice a shrill whisper. You're a crazy old woman. Am I? I asked softly. Dr. Klein, perhaps you can weigh in on my mental state in a moment. The doctor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. But cars and houses are just window dressing, aren't they? I continued, my voice gaining strength. Let's talk about the engine of your success. Hale Construction. I pulled out the final and most devastating document from the envelope. The corporate ownership records for his company. A thick sheaf of papers bound in a blue legal cover. I spread it on the table. Mark, I said, turning to Ethan's stunned partner. I'm afraid you've been misled for a very long time. You see this pie chart in the corporate charter? This 80% share, held by a shell corporation called RH Investments? RH stands for Robert Hale. It's the investment company my husband and I started 30 years ago. I am the sole owner. Ethan, you don't own your company. You have been my highest paid employee for a decade, with a salary I generously provided. Your services are no longer required. Mark shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. What the hell, Ethan? You told me you were the majority owner. We were supposed to be partners. I put my whole life into this. Ethan couldn't speak. He just stared at the document, his mouth hanging open, making small gasping sounds. But I wasn't finished. The financial destruction was complete. Now came the moral execution. I pulled out my cell phone, my hand steady. And now, for the matter of your character. Or the lack thereof. I found the audio file I had labeled the zombie plan and pressed play. I turned the volume all the way up. Jessica's voice, sharp and cruel and unmistakable, filled the silent restaurant. She has no idea that Sunset Gardens is basically a prison for the elderly where they're going to medicate her until she's a drooling zombie. In 6 months she won't even remember her own name. The recording ended. The silence that followed was horrifying, thick with disgust. The guests stared at Jessica, their faces etched with a mixture of shock and contempt. Her mother, Carol, looked like she was going to be sick, her face a pasty gray. Dr. Klein slowly, deliberately, put his pen down and pushed his chair back from the table, a look of profound professional alarm on his face. He knew he'd been played, made an accomplice to a monstrous, premeditated crime. Jessica let out a strangled sob, turning to me with eyes full of terror. Evelyn, please, we can fix this. We didn't mean it. We were just stressed. Didn't mean it? I asked, my voice finally rising with the cold fire of my rage. Did you not mean to hire a crooked lawyer to have me declared incompetent? Because I have those recordings too. I looked at Ethan. Did you not mean to work with a corrupt doctor to falsify my medical reports? I glanced at Dr. Klein, who was now trying to become invisible. Did you not mean to steal my home, my savings, my last shred of dignity? I have the text messages planning my financial ruin. The only thing you didn't mean was for me to find out. I stood up to my full height. I was no longer the frail, stooped woman they saw. I was the woman who owned everything they had ever touched. This is all over, I announced to the room. The money is cut off. The eviction notice for my house will be served tomorrow morning. The cars will be repossessed on Monday. And Hale Construction is now under new management, effective immediately. I looked directly at Mark. You and I will talk on Monday. If you are as honest as I think you are, you might still have a future. As for my son, I turned to Ethan, who had collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands, shaking with silent sobs. You have nothing. You are exactly what you called me. A failure. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I picked up my small untouched jar of homemade jam from the edge of the table. I walked over to Ethan and placed it gently in front of him on the table. This, I said, my voice now quiet, devoid of anger, only filled with a vast empty sadness. This is the only thing you have left that truly belongs to you. And with that I turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the smoldering ruins of their lives and the whole shocked room behind me. 3 months later I was sitting on the spacious terrace of my real home, the Scottsdale penthouse, watching the sun rise over Camelback Mountain. The air was crisp and clean, and the coffee in my hand was rich and dark. For the first time in years I felt like I could breathe, truly breathe, without the weight of secrets and sorrow pressing down on my chest. The aftermath of that day had been swift and brutal, a controlled demolition of the life they had built, but I felt no guilt. Only a profound, quiet sense of liberation. The eviction was as messy and pathetic as I expected. Jessica had a screaming, hysterical tantrum on the perfectly manicured lawn as the movers, hired by my lawyer, efficiently removed their belongings from my house. Ethan was a ghost, silently packing boxes with a hollow, haunted look in his eyes. They moved into a small 2-bedroom rented apartment in a less desirable part of town, their fall from grace as public as their rise had been fraudulent. Hale Construction, however, was thriving. The first thing I did the Monday after that lunch was call a board meeting, a board that consisted of myself, my lawyer David, and my financial advisor. We officially terminated Ethan's employment for gross misconduct and fraud. Then I sat down with Mark. I laid everything out for him. The real books, the secret investments, the true potential of the company without Ethan's reckless spending and ego. I offered him a new contract, a real partnership with a minority stake and a significant salary under one condition. We would bring in a new CEO to run the day-to-day operations. He, a man who had nearly lost everything, gratefully and immediately agreed. Our new CEO was a woman named Sarah Jenkins, a brilliant 45-year-old civil engineer with a reputation for being tough but fair. She had been a rising star at a rival firm, and I poached her with an offer she couldn't refuse. In 3 short months, she had restructured the entire company, eliminated wasteful spending, and secured 2 new major contracts that doubled our projected revenue. The company wasn't just surviving. It was soaring, built now on a foundation of integrity and actual competence. My personal life had blossomed in ways I never expected. I sold the little house in Phoenix, the stage for my long performance, and officially moved into my penthouse. I started attending charity functions and art gallery openings, not as Ethan's mother, but as Evelyn Hale, a respected investor and philanthropist. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones, strong, intelligent women my age who had lived fascinating lives. They were doctors, lawyers, artists, and entrepreneurs. We bonded over our shared experiences, our triumphs and our heartbreaks. For the first time in a very long time, I had a circle of friends who saw me for who I was, not for what they could get from me. But the most important change, the one that brought true meaning to my newfound freedom, was the creation of the Evelyn Foundation. Using a significant portion of my own money, I established a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing free legal aid and emotional support to elderly individuals being victimized by family-related financial abuse. Our first case was a woman named Margaret, a 75-year-old whose children had drained her retirement accounts after getting power of attorney by convincing her she was too frail to handle her own bills. We fought for her, our lawyers working pro bono, funded by the foundation, and we won. We got her money back and had her children investigated for fraud. Seeing the look of relief and gratitude on Margaret's face, the way she stood up a little straighter, was more satisfying than any revenge. It was justice. It was taking the ugliest experience of my life and turning it into a force for good. I had taken back my life, but now I was helping other women take back theirs too. My penthouse was beautiful, the company was profitable, but this was my true inheritance. It was the legacy Robert would have been proud of. 6 months after that fateful Mother's Day, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was a cold caller, but something made me. Hello, Mom. The voice was hesitant, broken, and so stripped of its former arrogance that I almost didn't recognize it. It was Ethan. I was silent for a moment, surprised by the wave of complicated emotions that washed over me. There wasn't hatred, not anymore. But there wasn't warmth either. Just a deep, weary sadness for the boy I had raised and the man he had become. "What do you want, Ethan?" I asked, my voice neutral. It was the only tone I could manage. I know I have no right to ask you for anything," he said, and I could hear him take a shaky breath. "But could I see you? Just to talk. I need to apologize. Properly. Face to face." I agreed to meet him. I realized I wasn't doing it for him. I was doing it for me. I needed to close this chapter for good, to see what, if anything, was left of my son. We met at a quiet, neutral coffee shop halfway between Phoenix and Scottsdale, a no-man's land between my new life and the ruins of his. The man who walked in was almost unrecognizable. The impeccably dressed, arrogant executive who walked like he owned the world was gone. In his place was a man who looked tired, defeated, and much older than his 42 years. He wore a simple, slightly wrinkled polo shirt and jeans. His expensive Swiss watch was gone, replaced by a pale strip of skin on his wrist. He looked his age for the first time in years. He stood awkwardly by the table until I gestured for him to sit. He sat down opposite me, unable to meet my eyes, staring at his hands on the table. "Mom," he started, then stopped, choking on the words. He took a moment to compose himself. "I don't know where to begin. What I did, what we did to you, there's no excuse. It was monstrous. It was evil. And I am so sorry." I listened, studying his face, searching for the telltale signs of manipulation I had become so attuned to. But I saw none. I saw only shame, profound and soul-deep regret. But I needed to know the source of that regret. "Let me ask you a question, Ethan," I said quietly. "And I want you to be completely honest. If I had really been the poor, helpless, slightly confused old woman you all thought I was, would you still think what you did was wrong?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He flinched. He stared down into his now cold coffee cup, thinking for a long, painful time. Finally, he looked up, and his eyes were filled with a terrible, honest shame. "No," he whispered, the word barely audible. "I don't think I would. We would have told ourselves it was for your own good. We would have convinced ourselves that you couldn't take care of yourself, that Sunset Gardens was the best place for you. We would have justified it. The only reason I see how evil it was is because you had the power to stop us. You showed us what we really are." It was a devastating admission. And it was the truth. His remorse wasn't born from a moral awakening. It was born from the consequences of his actions. He was sorry he got caught. He was sorry he lost everything. He told me Jessica had left him almost immediately after they lost the house. The divorce was messy and acrimonious. She had taken what little was left and moved back in with her parents, blaming him for the entire debacle. He was working a low-level sales job at a company that sold office supplies, trying to pay off his mountains of debt. He was for the first time in his adult life truly on his own. "Is there any chance for us?" he asked, his voice small like a child's. "Not for money. Not for anything. Just for you to be my mom again. Can you ever forgive me?" I took a deep breath, the answer I had formulated over months of quiet reflection ready on my lips. "Ethan, I have already forgiven you," I said, and I meant it. Holding on to that much anger is a poison, and I refused to drink it any longer. It was destroying me, not you. But you need to understand something very important. Forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. Forgiveness is for my peace of mind. Reconciliation requires trust. And you obliterated that. I told him that if he ever wanted a real relationship with me again, it wouldn't be built on a single apology in a coffee shop. It would have to be built on years of consistent, demonstrated change. On therapy. On him becoming a man who does the right thing not because he's afraid of getting caught, but because it's the right thing to do. We left the coffee shop that day with nothing resolved, but with a fragile, painful truth between us. The door to my life was not slammed shut in his face, but it was not wide open either. Only time and his actions would tell if he could ever truly earn his way back in. It's been a year now since that Mother's Day. A year that feels like a lifetime. My life is fuller and more vibrant than I ever thought possible at 64. My company, Hale Construction, is a leader in the industry under Sarah's brilliant guidance. known now for its integrity and quality. The Evelyn Foundation has helped over 50 women and men reclaim their lives and their dignity from relatives who tried to take everything. We provide the legal firepower they can't afford, and we give them a voice when they've been told to be silent. My circle of friends has become my new family, a family built on mutual respect, shared laughter, and genuine affection. As for Ethan, he calls me once a week. The conversations are often awkward, stilted. He tells me about his work, about the therapy sessions he started attending. He tells me about his struggles, about the humbling experience of starting over from nothing. I listen. I am polite, but I am guarded. It is the slow, arduous process of seeing if a new foundation can be built on the ashes of the old one. I don't know if we will ever get back to where we were, or if we even should. But he is trying. And for a mother, that has to be enough for now. Looking back, I realized the most valuable thing I gained from this entire ordeal wasn't the satisfaction of revenge, as sweet as that moment was. It was discovering who I truly was when I stopped pretending to be someone else. For years, I had hidden my strength, my intelligence, and my wealth behind a mask of humility, afraid of outshining my own son, afraid of being seen as anything other than a simple, supportive mother. I made myself small so he could feel big. It was the biggest mistake of my life. The woman I am today wakes up every morning in her own home, a home she is proud of and knows her worth. Not because of the numbers in her bank account, but because she has fought for her right to be respected. I make decisions based on my own desires and my own values, not on what others expect of me. The best revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's building a life so magnificent, so powerful, and so genuinely yours that their betrayal becomes nothing more than a footnote, a catalyst in the grand story of your life. The sweetest success is living so fully, so authentically, that those who once underestimated you are forced to watch from the sidelines, haunted by the ghost of what they could have had if only they had chosen kindness, if only they had valued you for who you were. Today, I am richer than I have ever been. Not just in finances, but in self-respect, in authentic relationships, and in the deep, profound peace that comes from living a life that is completely and unapologetically my own. And that, more than any mansion or company, is the true treasure I found when I finally stopped hiding in the shadows of my own life. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I know from the work I do at my foundation that I am not alone. My question for you is this. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you had to stand up and reclaim your power from someone who underestimated you? Whether it was family, a boss, or a friend. Let me know in the comments below. Your stories give strength to us all. And if this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing for more. You never know whose life you might change by sharing it.